So today on Sports File, we're going to take a literary look at probably one of the most important sports book in world history, and probably the best sports book ever published in Canada. And if anybody knows me and knows my background covering and taking up for this team, there's no surprise. Ken Dryden's The Game. Now, in 1983, some 3 to 4 years after Ken Dryden's retirement from the Montreal Canadiens as arguably the best goaltender of the 1970s, he decided to fully chronicle the last season he had with Montreal, which led them to the Stanley Cup that year with victories over the Bruins in the semifinals, their great rivals, and the Rangers in the finals. Now, The Game is a very, not say concise book. It's less than 400 pages. It reads very quickly, very well written, because as we all know, Dryden was a studier of the game, a lawyer, very erudite, as we used to call him, very intelligent. But he breaks down the pressures of what he called the tools of ignorance, like a catcher. Any goalie from the 1970s can tell you it was a different kind of league. The NHL was a lot of pressure, a lot of fighting, a lot of things going on. So Dryden's book basically breaks down the many eras that he touched and touched him, including his rise from Cornell to be a Monday goaltender for the Canadiens in the 71 Cup run, which led, of course, to that famous comeback from 5-1 in Game 2 against Boston in the quarterfinals. The 1972 Summit Series, where Dryden had a very bad series of games, but he won the last contest even though he could never understand the Russians. The 1975 New Year's Eve game, where basically Montreal so well played the Russians, even Peter Mahovlich apologized at the end of the game for not beating them, and Dryden again had a bad game. I think the Russians had his number. So the whole book talks about his attitudes as a goalie, attitudes towards his teammates, how his life affected his family, how being an Anglophone, playing in a French province where he basically tried to adapt as best he could to the culture of Quebec. Now, according to many critics, it's considered a top 10 world sports book. Sports Illustrated, who has always gave great recognition to writers for them and outside the SI family, called it the 9th best sports book of all time. I think it's, again, the greatest Canadian sports book of all time. So to even have an American publication recognize the fact that the game is so impactful. But here's how the game changed coverage of hockey. We had books previously that would break down, history of teams and different people. Stan Feischler, a few others were writing great books. But in this case, allegedly the book was being worked on when Dryden first came in. There's scenes, of course, in the 1972 Summit Series movie that showed Dryden taking notes, and this was a book a long time in coming. Now, the 79 season in the book is kind of broke down, not saying just in 7 days, but like a series of 7 days that he was reflecting back and forward as to what was going on. A lot of people figured that year was going to be his last season with the Habs because he was losing his quality of play. Montreal's dynasty started to break up. That was the year, of course, that Bowman and Lemaire, eventually left. There was a lot of discourse because of, Guy Lafleur's problems on and off the ice. Now, each player in the Habs that year are kind of touched upon in the book, including the infamous Steve Shutt, quips, Dougie Risebrough, Gainey, Lemaire, or even Cam Connor. Again, Mario Tremblay against Peter Mahovlich, the different young and older players that were emerging. Larry Robinson, when Big Bird used to be the enforcer. Now, the book itself, it could be considered a hockey book for the hockey fan and not for the hockey fan. You could read the book as a Kenny Dryden fan, as a Montreal Canadiens fan, and really get everything. But if you're not a fan, there's something there for everybody. And this is about as non-fiction as you can get, because there was no limitations in his coverage. He basically told it like it was. He spoke about his connections with his brother Dave, playing with the Sabres and Oilers, different teams, how Dave was a mentor, his life growing up in urban Ontario, to talk about the fact, the demands of the Montreal Canadiens fans, the battle he had with Buddy Larocque, like unofficially, how Bowman was disrespected, how Claude Ruel had his favorites, goes on and on. Now, for anybody that knows the series of the game, there's been kind of sequels and refits and different stuff. But there's never been a TV movie based on the game. That would be interesting to see. But the problem is, I don't think people would believe half the stories that are presented in it. And it talks also about the way that Ballard hurt the Leafs so much that it literally, in Dryden's words, killed the rivalry Montreal and Toronto had. But, Dryden was, not say an overachiever, but the hardest person on himself wasn't the media, it was himself. He saw to perfection where perfection could never be attained. And, that's seen in certain passages of the book where he either underthought or overthought certain situations on the ice. Now, for a lot of Montreal Canes fans that are new fans, I don't know if someone under the age of 30 has maybe even read the game. So I say to those people, give a chance. Go in your uncle's closet or your grandfather's closet. I think most Canadians of my age, when I first read it, that was the first book that really put all my journalism career in focus. I said, if I can write like Ken Dryden of the game, and I've stolen from the book in relation to descriptions of sporting situations, of a breakdown of columns, and I only steal from the best. I'm not an original reporter. I basically have mimicked a lot of things I've seen before, like any person should. You're not going to reinvent the wheel when you're just making wheels. I just make wheels. So again, I met Ken Dryden when he was running for the Liberal leadership, and when he was a Liberal MP, I found him again to be a great guy. Jean Beliveau once told me a few years before, he said, you got to meet Ken Dryden. He's quite an interesting cat. Nobody really understood what he was talking about half the time because he was so intelligent, but there's a lot of depth with that. But people forget that he was also the color commentary in the 1980 Olympic Championship Nazi clinching game, but the game Russians in the States. And he changed the way hockey color commentator was being looked at. A lot of people have mimicked his style, even though it was very short. Anyway, so a game that is a 10-star book. That's one of the few books in Canadian history. Now, it's not the greatest Canadian book of all time because no nonfiction book can compete with, the other fiction writers. But for what it was and what it needed to impart and what it encapsulates, because Fischler was not a Canadian writer. He was the best hockey writer at the time, but he wasn't writing from an Canadian perspective. He was writing from American perspective. Now, there's different places online you can read reviews of the book, including, everybody talked about, Mordecai Richler really plugged it, Scott Young, all these great people. But if you ever meet Ken Dryden, not only ask him to autograph the book, just ask him, is there some other stories you need to tell? Because I'd like to see if Dryden could talk a little bit about, the 1976 season, or more about when they bet Philadelphia in the famous 4-game series where, the Flying Frenchman killed the goon style of the time. So again, on this beautiful day where we're leading into heavy tax season, New Brunswick and Canada, we wish you the best. And like Ken Dryden liked to say probably many times, not only keep your stick on the ice, keep the other player, the other team, always in focus. As a goalie, and as Carey Price liked to say, you got to focus. Please focus on the game. If you haven't read it in the wild, reread it. If you haven't read it before, highly recommend it. And again, like, share, subscribe. Thank you so much. And one last thing before we leave you go, best wishes to Paul Leduc, our famous wrestler from Quebec. He had some medical condition that cropped up very quickly this week. We wish him a great recovery because the Leduc family has been so good to us sports reporters and wrestling fans in the Maritimes. The extended family has just been tremendous. So I hope, Paul, you get better, brother. It's a little shout out today, and keep going on, keep it going on. Have a good one. Bye.